You know, it's interesting in this particular scripture reading that the Gita verse that Swami chooses to pair with the birth of Christ is about reincarnation. And you sort of like, it's not, when you're first thinking of it, it's not exactly obvious why he would choose that one of all ones to choose, who knows the secrets of my many lives. He goes no more out. He is no longer compelled by the forces of karma to have to incarnate. Let me pull this together. Give me a moment here. Oh yes, one of the early years that I was here, living here, there was a rabbi down in Los Gatos or somewhere. I don't know how we got acquainted. The fact that I grew up in a Jewish family is something that is known. Perhaps he contacted me because of that connection. I really no longer recall. He was a very sincere and nice young man, but he was telling me, he was relatively new at his ministry. Excuse me, you don't call it a ministry, I think, when you're Jewish. I can't remember. What do you call it? Rabbinate. Thank you. I've lost it. One of my friends said to me, "Oh, your parents must be so proud of you with your being a minister of this church." I said, "Not really." But we got along fine anyway. But going back to this rabbi, he said when he was having to talk to the Sunday school children and explain to them the essence of Judaism, he was embarrassed to realize that he couldn't figure out what it was. And he was somehow hoping that I could tell him what it was. Yeah, it was a little complicated. Eventually, and not very long after, he decided that he would rather be a psychologist than a rabbi. It sort of worked its way out for him. But I was talking to him, frankly, about the dilemma that both the Christians and the Jews have created for themselves, and they're both in the same position, which is when Jesus was born, and what he taught what they call in India Sanatana Dharma, which is, that phrase means the eternal truth, or another lovely definition I like is simply that which is. That it's not even a question of this is spiritual life and this is life. Sanatana Dharma is simply that which is. We're all born, we have these experiences, we try to make it through in the best possible way that we can. Are there any rules? Are there any understanding? Is there any higher reality to this? Or are we all just sort of making it up as we go along? The principles of Sanatana Dharma is simply that which is. The reason why we're born, the reason why we live, where our happiness comes from, what causes suffering. And the principles of Sanatana Dharma come down from a very high age when people didn't have to guess. They just perceived. They had the inner consciousness to just see the power of God behind. This is what also our scripture reading was talking about, that those who see with divine sight see that the divine presence is manifested everywhere. This is the principle of Sanatana Dharma. Another of the principles that are involved there is a very obvious one, which is that birth into one body is not the beginning. Death, which is exit from that body, is not the end. Reincarnation is simply the description that there is an ongoing individual consciousness that inhabits a body, goes through the experiences that incarnation can give. When it's finished, you put down the body and you go on. Which says that there is a potential for every individual in a physical body to gradually learn and expand. I mean, the physical body has its limits. It crests at a very early stage of this whole thing. It's so remarkable, no matter how much people enjoy or don't enjoy being parents, no matter how skilled or unskilled they are in it, barring really traumatic events, that child will just keep growing. And you see, last night we had a gathering for our congregation members, and there were 3 small-bodied people in the middle, and everything about them is little. Their hands, their feet, their brains, they were perfectly marvelous, but they were small. And I just kept thinking, in 10 or 20 years, they won't be. All of you all of us, big hulking people, used to be little delicate individuals, and nothing happened. It was no particular skill on our part. We just sat there and got bigger, right? That's what those little kids are doing. Karen Gamo's father is a university professor, and he seems to be I've never even met him, but I've heard over the years, he seems to be a rather detached and enlightened parent. And he talked about at the beginning, Karen as an infant and the cat were pretty much equal. And then through no effort on his part, she gradually got bigger and better than the cat, And that's just the way it is, because it's the soul inside that's pushing that forward. And everything in this world is symbolic, just in the same way that the little baby gradually gets better than the cat, than the cat, and then it has language and it can open its own can of food, that sort of thing. It just gets better. And gradually, at least in Karen's case, even more refined qualities come forth. But childhood is just symbolic of the soul's long journey. We look scarcely better than the cat to great saints who watch us just running around, chasing little balls of wool, in essence, and getting so excited about nothing and furious about things that are not worth getting upset about. But gradually, that soul pushes and pushes and pushes to the river going back to the ocean, the limited awareness finding its confinement unbearable over gradual incarnations, keeps pushing that limit until finally the principles of Sanatana Dharma tell us that the jiva, the individual, reaches the state of perfect God realization. And this is why we have these images on the altar of actual persons who have lived, whose lives can be documented. Some are farther back in the past, like Jesus, but some are quite contemporary, like Paramhansa Yogananda or Swami Kriyananda, who many of you knew and some of us knew quite well, who have incarnated time after time and gradually expanded that awareness until it reached infinity. That's where we're going. And all true spiritual paths are based on Sanatana Dharma, that we have infinite potential, and not only do we have the potential to realize it, but we will realize it. We can take as long as we want. We can take a very, 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 very long time to reach that point, but inevitably we will. And all true spiritual teaching is based on that potential. However, the poor Jews and the poor Christians and the poor many others, once you take reincarnation out of that, the whole system just falls to pieces. I mean, where else can it be? Can you imagine? Well, maybe you can. Okay, I can't imagine getting from where I'm standing all the way to infinity. And certainly just walking around the streets of any American city or watching babies with cats, whatever you're doing, it's a big space. And therefore, just as Swami was saying in the reading today, people think of saintly people, as saints even, as people just like us with a slightly better attitude. Swami works at every word that he writes. There's never any fluff in what he does. And every phrase, sometimes because I myself struggle to write, and because I watched Swami work at his writing for such a long time, I know the enthusiasm of getting a phrase just perfect like that. Just like us, with a slightly better attitude. I can hear him chuckling as he typed it like that. Because that really about sums it up. Because we don't even know how to imagine what it would be like to be entirely transformed. But the reason that people are stranded like that is because if you think of what you can accomplish only from birth to death, it's very hard to imagine how you're going to extricate yourself from all of this in this tiny little span of time. What is required is the understanding that we keep on evolving, that God keeps guiding us and inspiring us and pulling us upward until we have the power of these great avatars. Jesus said very inconvenient things like, "That which I do, ye shall do, and greater things." I mean, that was an amazing comment, which in itself just sort of turns many traditional theologies just completely on their head. You know, I can be equal to Christ. I can be equal to Yogananda. I can be equal to Krishna, to the greatest master that ever lived. Perhaps not today, but not that far away. All I have to do, well, I have to do nothing at all. It is inevitable. The river seeks the sea. And even when the sea says, "No, no, I'm not going to go. I refuse. I'm going to cling to this rock, this tree, this bank," it just gets pushed by its own nature, pulled by its own nature, driven by its own nature. But the Jews, because they got all tangled up with this question of whether Jesus was the Messiah or not, when I was 10, when I was a child, my father used to shave, and I would put the lid down on the toilet seat like little children do, and I would sit there and talk to him. You know, I had many, many conversations watching him, you know, do all that. Just those, for me at least, wonderful childhood memories. He was a very good friend of mine. But I remember he's there covered with shaving cream, you know, doing his face, looking in the mirror, and I said, "Daddy, why wasn't Jesus really the Messiah?" And my poor father, I can sort of see his eyes in the mirror like this. You know, we were not devout Jews. We seldom went to the temple. We were cultural Jews. And he stumbled around for a few minutes, randomly tried to think of scripture and rabbis. I mean, he had no idea why Jesus wasn't the Messiah. Absolutely none. I don't think he'd ever given it the question a moment's thought. I gave it very deep thought. I was staring at him like this, and I suddenly saw, this poor man has no idea. He has no idea. But he knows that Jesus can't be the Messiah, otherwise a whole lot of premises of his life are going to come crashing down, and he didn't know what to do with it. So I changed the subject, and I never brought it up again. I mean, if I had asked this rabbi who came counseling to me for counseling, I mean, how come? Why isn't Jesus the Messiah? I don't think he knew either. But the decision was made, and once the decision was made, it got harder and harder, hardened and hardened. I mean, Christianity was invented. Christianity turned into Christianity because nobody in the synagogues, nobody in the Jewish synagogues was interested in this new sect of Judaism. Jesus and all his followers, they were all Jews. I mean, when you get this Jews against the Christians, it's so ironic. They were all Jews. But it was a new dispensation. Jesus came for the Jewish people. I mean, he came because the Jews at that time were the only ones who had any remnant of Sanatana Dharma left. And then only one segment of the Jews. It was the Essenes, not the established order. The established order was corrupt priesthood. It doesn't need the name Judaism. Corrupt priesthood is its own karmic reality. And we have it in all traditions. They coincidentally were Jews. But over here, you had the Essenes who were still in Sanatana Dharma, and it was for them that Jesus came. And then after Jesus died, they had this new message. And so the first thing they did is they went around to all the Jewish temples and tried to say, you know, a prophet has come, and this is his message. But gradually, the corrupt priesthood said, no way, and then they just pushed them out. So Paul, especially, just said, well, if the people in my own community won't listen to me, I'll go out and find people who will. And then that's how it became something else. And gradually, there you have it. And then pretty soon everything gets defined by not accepting Jesus as the Messiah, even though my poor father couldn't remember why. It just happened so long ago. But then the Christians did the same thing. So then the Jews decided Jesus is not the Messiah, and even more strongly they began to decide no one can realize God. In fact, it's blasphemy to claim that you can be one with God. That's why Jesus was crucified, because he claimed, I and my Father were one. And the corrupt priesthood saw this as the point. You can't do that. That's heresy. Death is the punishment for that. And they convinced, this is the Easter story, I'm giving you a preview. Spoil alert, is that what they say? Right? But this is what happens in a few months. And we all know it when the little baby's there, but we don't think about it, you know. So they convinced those who had the authority to crucify that Jesus needed to be crucified because he had violated the fundamental premise of their religion as they were defining it, because they were so confused by this point. No one can have that consciousness. Of course, if no one can have that consciousness, what are we doing? What is the point? Well, the priests had it really worked out. The point is we have power and money, and lots of it. And we're going to hold on to it because we have the keys to salvation, and it's your tithes and your offerings and your sacrifices and your obedience and our power. This is not Sanatana Dharma. This is what happens, what human beings do after a while, which is why they keep reincarnating, the masters. And that's why Jesus came to the Essenes, because the rest of it was such a mess. And he knew that the Jerusalem temple would eventually kill him. That wasn't really his mission. His mission was to those with heart. But then, so then, my poor rabbi friend, he can't really tell these children what they're supposed to be doing. Be nice, be ethical, do righteous things. It's not like traditional Judaism and traditional Christianity have nothing to offer. They have a great deal to offer. But they don't offer God realization. So you just have to be good. You have to try to be good. You don't always make it. You do your best, but you're lost. You're just completely lost. If you think about it very much, you're in a period of time like we are right now, where the corrupt political priesthood is running everything. Liberal, conservative, Democrat, or Republican, it doesn't matter. They're just power and money. They're power and money looking out for themselves. That's all they're doing. This just happens. People find a way to get power and money. And it's frightening if we don't know that we're just pilgrims going through this world, and all that matters is the consciousness that we develop while this goes on. We have to know what we're doing here. This is Sanatana Dharma, that which is. And then at some point, the Christians, who knows why? Because this is just the play of divine light and darkness. This is how it plays out. The Christians decided that Jesus was the only Son of God, and therefore nobody would ever be one like him. The more expansive... Oh, candles burning the wall. That's bad. Thank you. It's hard for me to keep going while everyone's watching you blow out the candle. Pardon me? A cat could have done that. See, look. At some point, I remember now, the Christians decided that the only Son of God meant Jesus in his physical body. Master put it so simply. When Jesus, the whole key to the New Testament is the pronoun I. What did Jesus mean? Did he mean I, the body I presently inhabit? Or did he mean I, the infinite consciousness that has come in it, that comes in and out of this body and has come in and out of countless bodies before? Even in the Bible, they did their best a few hundred years after Jesus died to take out every reference to reincarnation. But some of them snuck through. Who do you say I am? He said. And then his disciples, named prophets that had lived before, that he is the reincarnation of those prophets. Oh, and why would they have said that, except it was the way that they thought? And it was the way that Jesus taught, because it was Sanatana Dharma. That's what the Essenes were still following. Jesus had transformed his own consciousness by the power of his own effort over countless incarnations until he had reached perfection. That which I do, ye shall do. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. He was just describing Sanatana Dharma. And when he said I, he meant that continuing consciousness. And then further, when his realization came, he meant I, the infinite self, which is the same as the self in all of you. And that is the Son, that is the pure reflection of the Father, is that consciousness within me. But somehow or another, it got to be Kali Yuga, and everybody got deeper and more confused. and it became Jesus, his physical body, that somehow was born, and then therefore the birth myths had to grow and grow and grow, and the death myths have to grow and grow and grow. Resurrection is true, but just it all had to just be made to work in a way it doesn't work, which is that he just popped up, was perfect, and then he died and went back to heaven, and then by his grace, somehow all of us, it's going to work out for all of us. But everybody's left with nothing to do because we can't take responsibility. We don't have a system. We try to be good because that much is left. And thank heaven, thank God, that much is left. Because without some transcendent moral code, well, I remember Joseph Campbell. This was many years ago, but he was a big sensation for a while, marvelously so, telling all these stories, traditional myths and stories, and it was really a beautiful contribution he made, which I hope is still alive, active somewhere. But someone said to him, what happens to a society when they lose touch with all of these wonderful stories and myths and allegorical ways of explaining higher truths? And I just remember he was an older man by then, and he just sat and he sort of pointed out the window. He said, this is what happens. And this is what happens. I mean, people are just, if I can get it for myself, why wouldn't I take it? If I can get away with it, why wouldn't I take it? If I can have power and money, why wouldn't I take it? Someone was talking to me recently about a child of 10 or 11 years old who was severely bullied in school, just in a terrible way. And then they went to the principal and to the teachers and they tried to get it settled, but nobody could really do anything. Everybody's well-meaning, everybody's trying to be good. But the children are being raised for power and money and grades and advanced placement and awards for the best. It's all competitive. It's all competitive. And then they go back and say, be nice, be nice. But the whole value system is competitive. Why would they be nice? And everybody's so confused because they want them to be nice, but there's no Sanatana Dharma. We're not starting anywhere, we're not going anywhere. And the children, because children are like this, they're not fooled. They're looking right at it, and they know, they recognize hypocrisy, they can smell it. They know it's pure hypocrisy. I mean, the parents don't mean it to be, the teachers don't mean it to be, but there's no context. There's no Sanatana Dharma. They're rewarded for excellence, and if you're not excellent, you're marginalized. So they behave accordingly. Oh, surprise, surprise. We are in trouble, big trouble, as a culture. But fortunately, we're not at all. Because underneath it, this divine light is getting ever more powerful. And these masters are working on it. You read in The Path, you read an autobiography of a yogi. Jesus and Babaji together are very concerned about what's going on here. And together they have planned the salvation of this planet. That's what these masters are about. And that's what the whole movement that you see simultaneously with the corrupt priesthood in politics and money and banking and sometimes I even think in education. Who knows? Wherever it is, the corrupt priesthood has a lot of power. They think they have a lot of power. But all of those corrupted people at the time of Christ, they're barely a footnote. The only reason we even know them is that in some way they tried to interfere with Jesus. Otherwise, they're gone. But the power of Christ lives on, doesn't it? Because this is the real power. This is the real power. That which I do, ye shall do in greater things. Don't for one moment imagine that anything about this is either in the past or far away from you. You know, this is our reality. The Star of Bethlehem was no comet, no combination of planets, no, early global warming phenomenon, God knows what. It was none of those things. The Star of Bethlehem was the vision of light at the spiritual eye. And that's what the Bible was telling us. It's all forgotten, has been forgotten, and is now being remembered. We find the Christ very simply. Go inside. If thine eyes be single, that's what Jesus said. If thy two eyes, which are always looking around thinking that this is what's really happening, if those eyes are closed and focused at the single eye of spirit, thy whole body shall be full of light. Because that's who we really are. You know, the early Christians, when they were going around telling their story, they called it the good news. I just love that. And somewhere in the Bible, Jesus said, you know, if you follow me, if you follow this path of inner realization, it's going to put you at odds with the world around you. And in those days, being at odds with the world around you had very serious consequences, you know, like death and crucifixion and decapitation and imprisonment, you know. It doesn't happen like that for us, at least not yet, and probably won't happen at all. But he said, it's going to be a problem for you. They won't like you very much, and that's going to cause you trouble. That world, he said. But then Jesus said, be of good cheer, he said, for I have conquered the world. Think about that promise. That which I do, ye shall do in greater things. Be of good cheer. It doesn't matter what it looks like around us. It doesn't even matter what it is around us. Be of good cheer. I, the divine spirit, that which is in all of us. I have conquered the world. Two eyes become the single eye of spirit, the light of the Christ. Then thy body, thy whole life, thy consciousness for eternity will be nothing but light. What a wonderful promise. God bless you.